I saw her name. My heart stopped. He was sleeping, breathing softly, and I was breaking. I didn't wake him. I didn't scream. But that night, something in me shattered. I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, on the bathroom floor, knees pressed to my chest, listening to the soft breath of our children sleeping down the hall, while my entire world quietly collapsed inside me. He was in bed, still asleep, breathing like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just watched our life split open on a screen. I kept staring at the message, not because I didn't understand it, but because part of me still hoped it wasn't real, still wanted it to be a dream, a mistake, a misread. I miss you already. Just 6 words in the message. But they punched a hole straight through my chest. It wasn't the words that broke me. It was knowing he used to say those same words. To me. Once upon a time, he used to miss me. He used to smile at my texts. He used to reach for me across the sheets at 2 a.m. just to pull me close. But now, he was giving all of that softness, all of that tenderness, to someone else. The phone was still glowing in my hand. I could feel its warmth. It felt like it was burning me. I pressed the lock button, held it to my chest like it was a bomb I couldn't defuse. And I stood up, quietly. I didn't want to wake him. I didn't want him to see me like this. Small, broken, destroyed. I didn't want to give him that much power. So I tiptoed into the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and sat down on the cold tile floor. The silence was heavy, my breathing shallow. My fingers still curled around that phone, knuckles white. I don't remember how long I stayed there. 5 minutes? 30? An hour? Time didn't feel real anymore. The only thing I could feel was the ache, that deep, twisting ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Without making a sound, I stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room. Not for vanity, not even for clarity, but because I didn't recognize her. The woman staring back at me had red eyes, a clenched jaw, and shoulders that looked like they'd been carrying the weight of a dying marriage for too long. Her pain wasn't fresh. It was ancient, quiet, and tired. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing the signs. Or maybe I had seen them, and I just didn't want to believe them. The way he pulled away when I tried to hug him in the kitchen. The way he stayed later and later at work. The way he stopped noticing when I wore red lipstick, his favorite. Little by little, he had left me. And I too, afraid to ask why, just kept pretending not to notice. At some point, I stood up, put the phone back on the nightstand, slid back into bed beside him. Not because I was okay, but because I didn't know what else to do. It felt impossible to leave, to stay, to breathe. So I did the only thing I could. I lay there, eyes wide open, watching the ceiling blur and unblur as tears rolled silently into my hair. The next morning, I didn't speak to him. I moved around the kitchen like a ghost, poured cereal, made lunchboxes, packed backpacks. He acted normal, like nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had. But for me, everything had shifted. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't even stand near him without feeling like I was going to break. When the kids were finally out the door, he turned to me and asked, "You okay?" I looked at him, and for a second, I saw the man I married. The man who used to kiss my forehead every morning and rub my back when I couldn't sleep. But that second was gone as quickly as it came. I nodded, not because I was okay, but because I didn't trust myself to speak. Because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure whether a word or a scream would come out. That night, I couldn't sleep. He fell asleep instantly. I could hear the rhythm of his breath, could feel the heat from his body across the sheets. But between us, there was a canyon, an emptiness that neither of us acknowledged, a silence louder than any argument we had ever had. I lay on my side, hands pressed to my chest, holding myself together as quietly as I could. And somewhere deep inside, I asked a question I wasn't ready to answer. Is this the moment my marriage ends? I don't remember if I slept that night. or just floated through the hours in silence, watching the shadows on the wall stretch and fade with the moonlight. My body was still in bed, but my mind had already moved somewhere else. Somewhere cold. Somewhere careful. By the time the sun came up, I was already in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still tasting the bitterness of what I couldn't unsee. The butter sizzled on the pan. I made pancakes, blueberry his favorite. Not out of love, but because I didn't know how else to function. He walked in, rubbing his eyes like a child. "Smells amazing," he said, half smiling. I didn't turn around, didn't respond, just slid the pancake onto his plate and kept moving. And inside me, something shifted again. Not with rage, not even with grief, but with distance. We sat at the table. The kids laughed. He scrolled through his phone between bites. And I watched the syrup drip down the edge of my plate, like it meant something. Like if I stared long enough, I'd remember who I was before this. After the dishes were cleared, the backpacks zipped, and the goodbyes were kissed. He lingered, just a moment longer than usual. He looked at me like he was trying to read a language he'd forgotten. Then finally, "Are you doing all right?" His voice was cautious, soft, like he knew he was entering a room already on fire. I glanced at him. My lips parted, but no words made it to the surface. There was a thick wall between my chest and my throat. I wasn't sure if I was holding something in, or if everything inside me was already gone. So I gave him nothing. Not a nod, not a shake of the head, just silence. And he didn't push. He just stood there, looked at me for one beat too long, and walked out the door. That night I didn't fold his laundry, not to punish him, but because my hands couldn't touch anything that belonged to him, without wanting to drop it. I left the shirts in the basket, walked outside, and stood barefoot on the patio for almost 20 minutes. It was cold. I didn't care. The wind felt better than the ache inside the house. Somehow everything became about pretending. Pretending I hadn't read the texts. Pretending the woman in the mirror still had a husband who saw her. I went to work. I answered emails. I asked the kids about their math homework. I laughed at a meme in the group chat. And then I cried in the shower where no one could hear me. At dinner, I said the usual. Wash your hands. Use your fork. Please finish your vegetables. Meanwhile, the space between him and me at the table felt 10 feet wide. He asked the kids about school. He told a story about a dog he saw on his lunch break. They giggled. I smiled on cue, but even they seemed to sense the quiet between us. Children feel things adults don't say. Later that week, I found one of his shirts on the floor, wrinkled, warm from the dryer. I picked it up, held it for a moment, and then I pressed it to my face. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to smell the him I used to know. Maybe I was trying to remember the last time he held me with that same cotton sleeve. Whatever it was, I couldn't find it. All I smelled was detergent. All I felt was empty. So I dropped the shirt, right there on the floor, and walked away. His shirts lay crumpled on the chair again. I'd left them there days ago. But this time, when I saw them, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel conflicted. I looked straight at them, and walked away on purpose. It wasn't about forgetting anymore. It was a choice. And for once, I didn't apologize for it. Not out loud, not even in my head. A strange satisfaction fluttered in my chest at that small act of neglect as I switched off the light and walked away. I didn't explain myself, didn't even meet his puzzled glance when he noticed I just drifted past him, silent and hollow, daring him with my eyes to question why I let our perfect order fray. I made only 1 cup of tea and left no dinner for him that night. Our evening routine had cracked. I no longer asked if he was hungry or tried to pretend with a shared meal. I nibbled a dry piece of toast over the sink, tasting nothing. He lingered in the doorway as if to speak, but I kept my back turned until I heard him shuffle away, relieved and hurt at once. The next morning I stood before the mirror, twirling a tube of deep red lipstick between my fingers, its weight strange after so long untouched. The woman staring back at me had dark shadows under her eyes and a hard set to her mouth. Still, I painted my lips a bold crimsona fresh lie, declaring, I was fine, I was fine, I was fine, even as my heart fluttered like a trapped bird in my chest. I even chose a dress a bit tighter than usual, the fabric cool on my skin and somehow conjuring a ghost of the confident woman I used to be. At work, a coworker at the coffee machine gave me a warm smile. You look nice today, he said, and I felt a flush creep up my neck, flattered and guilty for even caring. A week ago, I would have simply smiled politely and looked away. But now I let his gaze linger and met it with a coy grin of my own. It was nothing, just harmless banter and a light brush of fingers as he handed me my mug, yet it sent a thrill through me, a spark of validation in the midst of my emotional winter. In that brief exchange, I remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be wanted. It felt good and awful all at once, like pressing on a bruise just to feel the pain that reminds you you're alive. I stayed at the office late, busying myself with work that wasn't even mine just to delay going back to a house that no longer felt like home. By the time I finally left, night had fallen completely. I took the long way through side streets with the windows down, letting the cool air wash over my feverish skin. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot, cut the engine, and rested my forehead on the steering wheel as a shuddering breath escaped me. When my phone buzzed with his name on the screen, I couldn't bear to answer. My voice would have cracked if I tried to say hello. I let it ring until it stopped. In the new silence, my heart was pounding, adrenaline and anguish coursing together as I sat there on the brink between hatred and heartbreak. It was late when I finally crept back into the house. The rooms were dark, except for the faint blue flicker of the television, where he had fallen asleep on the couch. I stood over him for a moment, listening to his gentle breathing in the dark, wondering how the man I once fell asleep beside so easily had become a stranger. My eyes traced the familiar curve of his brow and the broad shoulder I used to lean on, and I felt nothing and everything in one dizzying rush. I wanted to shake him awake, to pour out all my hurt and fury and demand, why, how, who, every question screaming in my head. My hand hovered over him, but I clenched it into a fist and drew back. He slept on, oblivious to the tempest inside me, and after a long, shaky exhale, I turned away. Behind the bathroom door, I sank to the cold tile floor and finally let my mask slip. My chest hitched, and a low sob clawed up my throat, startling me with its raw sound in the silent house. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stifle it as tears stung hot behind my eyelids, and I felt my heart cracking along invisible lines. All these little rebellions had been just paper over a wound. Beneath each act of defiance, an ocean of grief threatened to drown me. I wrapped my arms around myself on the hard floor and rocked as wave after wave of emotion crashed into the walls I'd built inside. Trembling with my forehead on my knees, I knew this silent war couldn't last much longer. Something was going to break. I was going to break if I kept living like a ghost. In the darkness behind my eyes, I sensed a faint light, a dawn of truth and confrontation approaching. Though I feared it, part of me reached toward that inevitable awakening, desperate for an end to the numbness, whatever storm it might bring. The morning after, my daughter looked at me and asked, "Why do you smell like someone else's house?" I sat in the car for nearly an hour. The engine was off, keys still in the ignition, silence thick around me, the kind that doesn't comfort, only confronts. I hadn't even realized I was crying until I saw the streaks on my cheeks in the rearview mirror. She hadn't said it with suspicion. She'd said it with curiosity. Pure, innocent. But her words hit harder than any slap. Because what do you say? When the person who reminds you you're a mother also makes you realize you've become someone you don't recognize? That night, I sat at the dinner table but didn't eat. I moved the food around my plate while my children chatted about school and their missing socks, and he stared at his phone between bites. He wasn't texting, not laughing, just scrolling, the way someone does when they've already said everything they had to say to you. I watched his fingers, watched the quiet curve of his brow, and for a moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, not for him, but for us, for what we'd let happen, for how far we had let ourselves drift without either of us raising a hand to pull the other back. That night, I took a long shower, not to wash off a day, but to see if I could feel anything again. The water was hot, almost too hot. My skin turned pink, but I needed it. Needed to know I was still alive under everything I was pretending not to feel. I stood there, forehead against the tile, arms hanging limp at my sides, and I whispered to myself, I'm tired. Not just physically, but bone deep, soul deep. I was tired of trying to win a game where love had stopped being the prize. Later, I sat on the edge of our bed, wrapped in a towel, looking at a picture of us from years ago. The smiles in the photo felt like strangers. My arm around his waist, his head tilted toward mine. And I wondered, did we really used to love each other? Or had we just been holding on to the idea of what love was supposed to look like? I started journaling again, not to track healing, not for self-improvement, just to unload the weight in my chest somewhere other than on his silence. At first, it was just fragments. I don't recognize myself anymore. I miss laughing. I miss being touched without wondering why. But slowly, the words came back. My voice came back. Not the one I used at meetings. Not the one I used with the kids. But the voice I'd buried beneath years of biting my tongue and prioritizing someone else's needs over my own. One afternoon, I went for a walk by myself. No purpose. No errands. No headphones. Just me. Shoes on gravel. Leaves dancing in the wind. The sound of my breath slowly finding rhythm again. And somewhere between the second and third block, I felt the first flicker of peace. Like my soul had finally sat down beside me and said, It's okay. You're allowed to be tired. But you don't have to stay lost. That night, I didn't put on the lipstick. I didn't stay late at work. I didn't post a story. I didn't pick a fight. I just existed. I made tea, curled up with a blanket, watched a show I loved before life got so heavy. And when he came into the room and asked, Want me to sit with you? I didn't answer right away. I looked at him. Really looked. Not through the lens of anger. Not through the cracks of betrayal. But as a man I once trusted. A man who failed me. But maybe also a man who didn't know how to find his way back either. I nodded. Once, he sat. And for a while, we didn't speak. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't want to leave the room. Something changed after that night on the couch. Not like a miracle. Not like the movies. There were no grand gestures. No dramatic confessions. No music swelling as we fell back into each other's arms. Just stillness. And then, the smallest shift. The next morning, he poured me coffee. Black, just how I like it. He placed it on the table without a word. And I noticed he'd added a napkin under the mug so it wouldn't leave a ring. I didn't say thank you. But I noticed. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself soften just a little. We didn't sit down and talk about it. We didn't say things like, let's fix this. We just started showing up differently. He asked if I needed help with groceries. I didn't, but I said yes anyway. He picked up the kids from school one afternoon without me asking. He left a folded blanket at the edge of the bed when he got up earlier than I did. Small things. Quiet things. But that's how trust is rebuilt. Not with promises, but with presence. There were days I still felt cold. Still flinched when he reached for my hand. Still had flashes of the messages I read. That woman's name glowing on the screen like a brand burned into memory. And yet, when he held my gaze and didn't look away, when he let me be angry without rushing to defend himself, when he said, take your time, and meant it, I felt something loosen inside me. A single thread of tension, releasing. I began doing things for myself again. I painted my nails just because I liked the color. I bought fresh flowers for the kitchen. I turned the music up while cooking and danced barefoot when no one was watching. And then one day, he walked in and saw me. Really saw me. Not the wife who made dinner. Not the mother of his kids. But the woman he had forgotten how to look at. And for a second, he smiled like he used to. And I smiled back. We started laughing again. Not all the time. Not always at the same jokes. But enough. Enough to remember we used to be friends. That before the pain, there was play. He asked me one night, while we were lying in bed, do you ever think we'll be okay again? I didn't know how to answer. Because okay didn't feel like a destination anymore. It felt like a choice, one we'd have to keep making. Every day. Forgiveness didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in tiny, trembling moments when I chose to stay in the room. When I let him hold me even though I was still scared. When I let myself laugh, even when part of me whispered that I shouldn't. One night, as I was folding laundry his shirts, this time he came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. "I know I broke something," he said. "I don't expect you to forget. But I want to be better, because I hate the man I became." And I nodded, because I believed him. Because I had changed, too. I wasn't the same woman he betrayed. I was a woman who had been shattered and rebuilt. Not into someone new, but into someone who finally saw her own worth. And I chose to let him see it, too. Not because I was afraid to leave, but because I was no longer afraid to stay. Our marriage isn't perfect, but it's honest. We speak more now. Not just about bills and school forms, but about how we feel, about what we need, about what still hurts. Sometimes we still fight. But now, we don't leave the room when we're angry. We stay. And that, more than anything, feels like love.